That are being presented today. If you please come up and sign up if you want to be heard on one of the bills. We still have one more to go for a quorum. So as soon as we get one more person, we will get started. In the meantime, why don't we kick things off? Welcome to the Senate Judiciary Committee. We're going to go ahead and kick things off with the recognition of our judge of the day and our prayers. We start our meeting and we'll turn it over to Senator Hatchett. Which mic are you?
Number 13.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to recognize Superior Court Judge Chan Caldell, who's in the audience. He's does a great job up in the Mountain Judicial Circuit, and he's also got some pretty good neighbors. So he is my neighbor, but it's good to have you here, Judge. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So let us pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for gathering us here tonight. We pray that you speak to us and through us throughout this meeting so that we can do the will of the people of Georgia. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.
Thank you, Senator Hatchett. We now have a quorum. We were going to try to go in order of the agenda that's been set, but I see the first two people are not in the room yet. And so we're going to go with the third bill on the agenda, Senate Bill 499, Senator Tippins. Sometimes you sit in the front, you get in the way. That's always my approach. And you get called upon sometimes. How are you? Before you get started, let me gather these sign-up sheets and make sure we're all on the same substitute. LC 490936S, Senate Bill 499. And I will give you the floor.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Y'all have heard this bill before. It has to do with the collection of DNA. I heard your comments in the last meeting and have tried to tailor this bill to reflect this. This has to do with the collection of DNA samples from certain misdemeanor crimes upon conviction, and it also deals with certain felony crimes, very limited scope of felony crimes. After arrest, on a warrant, or upon a finding of probable cause at a commitment hearing under Article 2, Chapter 7, Title 17. The salient points to consider in this bill, if we look at statistics of the number of cold case crimes that have been solved, and many times there were multiple repetitive crimes by the same felon, it's amazing what we could do if we use the science available. I certainly understand the hesitation that some people have on collecting of these samples and the question of invasion of privacy. I don't think it's an invasion of privacy if it is these particular crimes, because these individuals are a threat to society, and I think if we can do anything to make our society safer, it's in society's best interest. I'll direct your attention to line 39, and I'm operating off of a substitute, LC 490936S. I will mention that there are some changes that have been suggested in this by the GBI, and this substitute reflects those changes. On lines 39, those felonies after arrest would be murder or felony murder as defined by Section 16, line 40, trafficking of persons for labor or sexual servitude, or 41, any felony listed under Chapter 6 of Title 16, which has to do with sex crimes solely. Also, on line 42, those convicted of a forcible misdemeanor or misdemeanor offense, these are the same misdemeanors that were listed in the original bill. The changes that the GBI has suggested, you'll find them starting on line 69, and it deals with the collection by oral swab or other non-invasive procedures. For the collection of this, the original code section on this. I'll reference line 67. It still references a withdrawal of blood samples, and I'd like to ask Legislative Counsel Michael Walker to address the reason we leave that wording in on line 67, since that's not the most common practice now, collecting DNA samples, nor the method that's recommended.
All right, let's go ahead and do that now. Michael?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Lines 66 and 67 are what we refer to as directory language. This is not, even though it is included in the bill, it would actually not be part of the codified statutory language. This is, in effect, how we provide directions to the Code Revision Committee and our publisher on how to prepare the official code of Georgia. And it is essentially backwards looking. So this describes the catch lines. If you go online and research the Georgia code and you see various catch lines to describe certain code provisions, that's what this language is referring to, and it is necessarily backwards looking. If this bill were to pass, for example, and the law were to change, this catch line would change in the upcoming publication of the Georgia code, but not before. So we use this language to reflect the code in its current state.
All right, thank you.
I'll also direct your attention to line 73, where it repeats the language dealing with oral swabs or non-invasive procedures. Also on line 76, also on line 109, that same language is mirrored throughout. The other change that the GBI recommended was on line 77, where it says the division. GBI had asked that be the department in each detention facility shall establish procedures for collection and transfer of samples. I'll let them, I would like to ask the representative from GBI to come up and explain the reasoning behind that. The department, each detention facility would collect and transfer those samples to that division within GBI, but it very specifically would not be collected by the GBI. And I'll be glad to answer any questions. I think that is the pretty much all of the changes that have been made in the bill, and I think these changes reflect the concerns that the committee, that I heard the committee voice at the first presentation.
All right. Thank you, Chairman Tippins, for your work on the bill. Are there any questions from the committee? All right. We do have a few people that signed up to be heard. First, Ms. Maisie Guertin with Georgia Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Strickland. So the changes that have been made to this legislation since we were here last time do not address the concerns that we raised, nor the concerns that Chairman Cowsert raised. Chairman Cowsert? Senator Cowsert?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm not remembering his role right now. With respect to the fact that it is securing DNA from people prior to a conviction, based merely on their arrest. And one of the concerns I would have, just to give you some examples of the way this would play out within the misdemeanor context. So when someone's been convicted of a forcible misdemeanor, that could potentially be a couple 17-year-olds who get into a fight at school. That would qualify for forcible misdemeanor and the application of taking DNA from one of those 17-year-old children, because they are not handled as juveniles in our state. Just to give you one example. Now I realize the other crimes that are listed here, murder and trafficking, and the others they are crimes that we are very concerned about. But at this stage of the game, these folks are presumed innocent, just like all of us. And I don't want to belabor my points that I made last week, but this bill still maintains concerns about privacy rights and self-incrimination rights, and we should not be taking people's DNA prior to their conviction in our state. It's just, it's unconstitutional in our view.
All right. You have a question from Senator Hatchett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you address the public policy behind taking fingerprints versus the public policy now where DNA? Obviously, technology has changed, and I think the I guess the intent behind fingerprints obviously was to create a database to prevent future crime and to look back and see if those fingers matched at a previous crime scene. Nowadays, we have DNA and we have the ability to do that. So your argument about it being unconstitutional, could you distinguish between the fingerprints and the DNA?
Yes.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
It's okay. To the best of my ability, I sure will. The other thing that fingerprints are not only used as investigation tools, as this would imply. The implication here is that we're going to collect DNA so that we can use it for future investigations. And I say that because the crimes here, if law enforcement needs someone's DNA to solve a crime right now, a crime that they're actually investigating right now, they can get a warrant for that DNA. I mean, there are mechanisms in place to secure DNA from people because you have probable cause to believe that you need it. You can articulate facts to the court that say, we have this particular murder that happened, we have this blood evidence, we have this, what other kind of evidence they have that DNA would help them solve the case with. We believe this person is potentially the perpetrator for these reasons. Please let us go take her DNA. And then the judge gets to decide if you do or not. In this bill, the only probable cause that's being considered is probable cause for the crime for which someone's arrested, whether there's DNA involved or not. And with fingerprints, we use them also for identification. I don't know to the extent the committee's ever seen someone's criminal history report, but it can be filled with aliases because people, frankly, aren't always honest about their names or their name, or maybe there's some discrepancy about their name. Fingerprints, for someone who's been in the system before, they're used for identity. They're used for more than just crime investigation. We use them for things like gun permitting. There's lots of ways that we use fingerprints in our society. It's not as invasive. They are, of course, they are unique. I wish I knew the law on the privacy and the self-incrimination, but I just don't know that law. I'd be glad to get it for you. But I do see a distinction, and in this case, this database is being established, and the only way that you can get out of it is if you're acquitted of this charge that may or may not be related to DNA at all. I mean, maybe there is going to be a policy decision that we want to start using DNA for gun permitting, DNA for other kind of licensing that we now use fingerprints for. That could be a larger conversation, but I'd be hesitant about that as well, frankly. But I'd be glad to get you some research around fingerprints and privacy rights. I just don't have it off the top of my head.
All right, thank you, Ms. Guertin.
Sure thing.
The next person to speak is Cleveland Miles with the GBI, the Crime Lab Director. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. So here to address any of the questions that were in the edits that we proposed in the bill that was the draft. The specific one that the Senator Tippins referenced as far as the division's concerned and wanting to replace that with the department. So the GBI doesn't collect samples, so we don't have a responsibility to do that. Having the division being listed as the entity to push out the collection procedures really doesn't seem to make sense in that we don't do the collection. It should be one of the entities that actually are responsible for doing those collections, be it the jailer or the Department of Corrections or what have you.
Okay, but y'all are okay with the final draft we have here? Is it something the GBI supports?
That's correct. So the draft and the way that it appears, it seems to address the things that need to be addressed. One of the major pieces of that being the expungement of those samples. Yeah. And so who's going to be responsible for that? Of course, that would be something that's not ideal to be placed on the GBI because of the processes that need to be followed to initiate the expungement. But outside of that, that's really the major concern, but it seems to be addressed in the bill draft.
Okay. Any questions from the committee for Mr. Miles? Well, thank you. A colleague, Stephanie Fowler, also signed up. Was that just answering other questions, or does she want to be heard as well?
Well, she's just here as a support, just in
Okay.
case she needed to speak.
Okay.
But that's the major concerns that we had.
Mr. Chairman, I would ask that he address the other states around us and how common this practice is in the southeast and in other states of the United States.
Yeah, that came up in our last hearing about other states that are doing this. I know the bill has been narrowed from the original draft, but is this something other surrounding states are doing as well?
Yes, that's correct. So currently there's 31 states that have some form of arrestee law. If you look at the southeast of the United States, Georgia is kind of out on an island of its own. All of our neighboring states do have some form of arrestee law. The next closest state to us is Kentucky that doesn't have any form of arrestee law.
All right, I appreciate it. Mr. Miles,
Okay, thank you.
that's everyone that signed to be heard on the bill. What's the pleasure of the committee? We have a motion to pass by committee substitute by Senator Watson. Is there a second? I have a second by Senator Hatchett. Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion to pass, please raise your hand. We have 3. All those opposed? We have 3. The chair votes aye, and bill passes 4-3.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, going back on the agenda, we're going to go backwards. Senator Rhett, you have Senate Bill 354. You can do it from there or down there, either however you want to do it. And we are working off a substitute in this bill as well. Y'all recall this is a bill we heard concerning annexation a couple weeks back, and Senator Redd has worked on a substitute, which is LC 471705S. If you will tell us, remind us about the bill, but tell us about the changes you made in particular, please.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and my fellow senators, and the rest of y'all. This is a pretty simple bill from a simple senator. Basically, what happens is it requires municipal corporation entities to provide notice to all affected landowners before a public hearing on any application of annexation. Basically, what it does is it requires that if you're going to annex an area, that you notify all the property owners, or at least 60% of them, about the hearing on annexation so that they can be aware of it. I came up with this bill because of 2 reasons. Number one, last session, somebody wanted to annex some area within a municipality. The bill made it through the House, but when it got to the Senate, we received phone calls of people saying that they hadn't been notified about being annexed into a municipality. And so we had to go back and make sure that the people who wanted to pass this bill did due diligence by contacting all the people and giving them a chance to voice their concerns. Also, there's a gentleman in my district, Old Man McTaggart. Him and his family have had property from him to his father to his grandparents. And he called me one day because he was happy that he was finally eligible to get school property tax exemption on his property. But then he had a notice in his mailbox that said that he has a new tax bill from a city that had annexed him, and he didn't know anything about it. So basically that's what it is in a nutshell. This bill just, along with put a notification in the newspaper about the bill, the annexation, but also contacting the property owners within the area. And we took out the voters because the original statute was owners, property owners, and voters. And I did that thanks to the help and support of my colleagues here on the Judiciary Committee. And if anybody has a question, if not, I'll yield.
Yeah, close
I'm
enough.
sorry.
Any questions for Senator Rhett? Or I believe was it someone. All right, no one signed up to be heard on the bill. Oh, what's the pleasure of the committee? We have a note. We do not have a quorum at the moment, do we? Well,
Well, I'm part of the
if you
committee.
want to go back and we will come back to the bill since you presented. No one signed to speak on it. We'll entertain a motion once we get a quorum.
Okay. Yes, sir. Thank you.
So we'll be at ease just for a second until we get somebody to join us. Some of our members are going back and forth presenting bills. We have confirmed that once we count correctly, everybody up here, we do have 6 of us, and the chair, as well as the person presenting the bill, is still a member of the committee, counts towards the quorum, and so we can vote on the motion. We have a motion to pass by Senator Jones. This is by committee substitute. Was there a second? Yeah. Second by Senator Kirkpatrick. Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. It carries unanimously. Thank you. So smooth, you know. I can make excuses when we go off the rails at 7 o'clock, but it's not even 4:30. All right, going back on the agenda, Senate Bill 543, Senator Halpern. And she has some assistance. I'm going to go and call with you Mr. James Valbrun with the Valbrun Law Group. And we are working off the original bill, LC 490856.
Thank you very
Good
much.
afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman.
The floor is yours.
Committee. Thank you. So I am bringing forward this bill, and this bill, like so many others, starts with a story. And this is a story of family members who've experienced loss, not so much by natural causes or health or medical reasons, but by tragedy and wrongful death. And so this bill is meant to clarify an ambiguity that is already in the law. There's one section that speaks of the fact that if a child dies by homicide, parents can bring a wrongful death claim. But it does not comment. It's silent on what happens if the parent is the one who causes the death of the child. In another section, it prevents those who who have committed a homicide it says that they cannot benefit from that homicide. But you can have family members who are arguing on 2 different sides of this, and that causes confusion for our judges. So this bill, very simply, is meant to close that loop and point back to the Slayer statute that's already there, and make explicit that parents who intentionally killed their child would not be able to profit from those actions. And the bill is expected to have an impact on several families who are regularly impacted by senseless acts of crime that are committed by parents against their children in Georgia. So ultimately, it clarifies the issue, reduces the strain on judicial resources, and increases the likelihood of justice and peace being brought to the families.
Or do you want to add anything, Mr. Valbrun, while you're up here?
She stated it very well.
I know.
It's hard
Just
to
giving you
follow
opportunity.
that.
I know you can always just take questions, but I want to give you opportunity in case you want to say anything.
My name is James Valverde. I'm an attorney that's been practicing in the state of Georgia for about 20 years now. I'm thankful to Senators Halpern, Senator Strickland, and the co-signers of this bill in their hard work in preparing Senate Bill 543. This issue holds special meaning for me, as well as a few of my colleagues that weren't able to be here today. C.K. Hoffler of Hoffler and Associates and Roger Kirschenbaum of Menden Freeman. It's my understanding that the Georgia Trial Lawyers Association, one of the largest bar associations in the state of Georgia, committed to emphasizing justice and access to the courts for all Georgians, has approved of this bill and contributed to this bill. The Georgia legislature, in its wisdom, provided that in every case of the homicide of a child, some party should be entitled to bring forth an action to recover for the value of the life of the child. Where the child has no spouse or no child of his own, the legislator entrusts that responsibility to the parent. The parent would be entitled to bring an action against someone for the wrongful death. But sadly, more often than we would like to think, the parent is the one responsible for the homicide of the child. What happens then? Another statute, Section 53(1)-5, known as the Slayer Statute, operates to exclude a killer or slayer from the right of recovery from the decedent's estate or to serve as his or her personal representative. So if I kill my wife, I can't rightly bring an action to receive the benefit of her estate. This statute can also be interpreted as conflicting with 19(7)-1, which gives the parent the right to bring an action. The legislative intent behind the Slayer statute was to keep killers from benefiting from their crimes. The proposed code would tie these two statutes together and crystallize the principle that a parent cannot reap any reward from their intentional killing of their child. The current ambiguity in the law operates to allow for what can seem like an endless litigation to a family that has just lost a child. Imagine dealing with that level of suffering, and on top of that, being hauled into court, having to pay for lawyers and court fees, and then being uncertain of the outcome. It's a tragic situation that I unfortunately have had to help a family through. While this is not the complete fix to every legal scenario that a parent-child killing brings about, it would certainly help greatly in providing expedient justice. As the members of the committee well know, judicial resources are precious. The clarity this bill brings would assist judges, limit the waste of unnecessary hearings and time and money spent preparing for the same on an issue that should be a no-brainer. Killers should not benefit from their killings. My hope is that you will help pass this bill and in that way help the actual people of Georgia who are personally affected by this. Thank you for your time and consideration.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Valbrun and Senator Halpern. Does anybody have any questions for them? That's everyone that's signed to be heard on the bill. What's the pleasure of the committee?
Do pass. Second.
We have a motion to pass by Senator Watson and a second by Senator Rhett. Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. It is unanimous.
Thank you so
All right.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
All right, going back now to the top of the agenda, Senate Bill 171. Senator Robertson, working off a committee substitute. We have LC 490903S. This was a bill that we heard last year during our special session initially, and Senator Robertson has worked on a substitute that we've had and we have tonight. Given the late hour and the fact that the longer we take on bills, we may lose a quorum at some point, I am going to limit the total time for speaking on the bill to 30 minutes. We have a lot of people sign up to speak versus trying to do my stop clock. I'll just set a clock for all those speaking in opposition to the bill. because everyone that signed up said they're speaking in opposition. And I'll do that for 30 minutes and start the clock and go down the list. If you will walk through the bill for us, Senator Robertson, in particular, focus on the changes that you made since last time we heard this as well.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just a slight correction, you've actually allowed me to come in front of you with this bill, I believe it's a total of 3 times, 3 or 4.
You presented another time, right?
Yes, sir. And I appreciate you and your office and the amount of effort and work y'all have given me with this. And during this process, I've had time to meet with 3 or 4 of the opposition groups, and we've made adjustments based on conversations and concerns. And of course, in some situations, we failed to agree, and then in others, we were able to work out compromises. But to be as brief as possible while respecting the committee's time, I will tell you what we've done is if you look in Section 2, Section 2 has primarily remained unchanged. Section 3 also. Over on, I believe, let's see. What we have done to primarily help with this, and it would probably be easier if I explained it this way. When it came to some of the punishments for damaging property, we have decreased the maximum incarceration time if an individual were to be convicted. We've decreased that substantially. When it comes to the permitting process, on the original legislation, we gave the municipality up to 10 days to review and approve a permit for assemblies. We've reduced that down to 3 days, still with the city being obligated to review the site and make sure from a risk management standpoint that it was those individuals that chose to hold an assembly there would be safe, and that the city would be able to protect them from anything that may occur where anyone tried to disrupt any rally or protest, if you will. And let's see. We eliminated one section completely that dealt with volunteer associations that cities may reach out to provide resources during major events, such as associations such as the American Red Cross and other groups that in some of these larger rallies and assemblies would come in and set up first aid stations and water stations and other things. We've eliminated that completely. So primarily what this legislation has come down to is simply requiring municipalities to provide safe spaces for individuals and groups to come and peacefully protest and speak out against government. It also provides protection for citizens who may be trapped in traffic by individuals who are aggressively and violently obstructing vehicle traffic. And also, for those individuals who choose to damage state property, we added cemeteries into it and structures after the Georgia State Patrol facility here next to the Capitol was assaulted during the summer riots of 2020. And it's just the bare bones of what it was when we first started. And I would be happy to answer any questions from the committee because really it's the original bill with chunks removed. I think it would be easier to answer any questions that the committee may have.
Senator Robertson, we discussed the affirmative defense language on lines 99 through 103. And in discussing that, I know I raised some concern about a person's property being included and the ability basically to use deadly force to defend property at any level as a affirmative defense. And are you still open to striking property from line, I guess it'd be property or on line 103.
Absolutely. I think it's a healthy adjustment to the legislation, and I think it gets closer to the goal of what I was looking for, because no vehicle is worth the price of a human life. So yes, sir, I'm absolutely open to that.
And I think some other folks suggested to me that we also should consider including the word imminent on line 102 between the words and attack. Is that something you're open to as well?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And at the appropriate time, I can offer those amendments. And those that are speaking today on the bill to you may want to provide some feedback on those changes as well, if you will. If you have any other suggestions as far as that paragraph, I'm sure you'll share that with us. Any questions for Senator Robertson? All right. We will start our clock on the testimony against the bill. And we'll start with Isabel Ataro, with Georgia Policy Director. He didn't say with who.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Come on up.
I'll tell you right now. Sorry about that.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. So I'm Isabel Otero. I'm the Georgia Policy Director for the SPLC Action Fund. So we are the C4 arm of the Southern Poverty Law Center. And I just wanted to, I know you're going to hear from my other colleagues in other civil rights organizations about constitutional issues. So I wanted to mostly focus on what could be political unintended consequences to this bill. In Section 3 on line 39, auditorium, for example, becomes a public convenience, and we understand that the way that the penalties are written are such that they include intent and they take that into consideration. But for example, school board meetings are held in auditoriums. Parents have been very frustrated here lately. If a parent decides or makes a comment, or parents get very frustrated and are outside and are surrounding a car for one of the school board members, are they then going to receive, the penalties, 5 years or a fine of no less than $1,000, right? Like, these are things that I think could be used for different kinds of assemblies and not just the protests that we know have turned violent in some regard. And so, for an assembly to be 2 or more persons, one of the examples that I gave Senator Robertson was, if you are outside of a clinic, at an abortion clinic, and you've got 2 people outside holding pro-life signs, and people start to feel threatened, start to feel like something may happen, are those people going to receive a fine or become, be a convicted felon because of those things? And so I just think that there are several places in here where I think this could be used in a way, if there is a political intent behind some of the prosecution of this, and all of this is going to be seen in the application of this law, and I just wanted to caution the committee against that. I think the other part of this, so our sister organization, the Southern Poverty Law Center, as most of you know, tracks a lot of hate groups and extremist groups like neo-Nazis, like the Boogaloo Boys, who are a group who is very anti-law enforcement, who are known for starting riots and for arson. And I think that the affirmative defense issue on Section 4, where someone could be given an affirmative defense for running over a protester, these are the type of groups that seek out and provoke violence, and sort of giving them an affirmative defense seems like a very reckless thing to do, and making this a potential target state for some of these groups. And I think that yesterday was the anniversary of Bloody Sunday, so we are giving an affirmative defense to a group like the neo-Nazis, but we're going to prosecute someone like Congressman Lewis for walking across the Edmund Pettus Bridge for a $5,000 fine in 5 years. And I just think that the priorities here are good, right? Like, the intention behind the bill is something that we understand, but I think that the consequences are something that folks are not quite, there are political consequences to this that I'm not sure folks quite understand. And I think the last point I will make is about the racketeering activity. A lot of the times, these are very chaotic situations. If violence breaks out, you can find yourself in a situation where law enforcement does not actually get to the person who started the violent reaction. And I think that then you're left with who organized the protest, which would have been, a peaceful assembly, or you get to the person who posted the Facebook event. Like, are those the people that are going to receive the racketeering charge? It's just not, I don't think that the language in here is clear enough. The language around monuments, for example, there's plenty in Georgia Code around protecting Confederate monuments. Well, I don't know that we need this here. And because it's so vague, you could potentially go up and use chalk on a monument. And that's not going to be a permanent damage, but it is damaging it for the moment. And you could end up with a $10,000 fine. So I just wanted to share those concerns. I'm happy to talk more about it. I appreciate the chairman and Senator Robertson for giving us some time to share those concerns. Thank you.
All right, thank you. If anybody has questions of the committee, just push your button and we'll pause the time during questions. We don't take away from people's ability to speak, but let's push your button if you want to be heard with the question. Make one comment. I forgot to mention Americans for Prosperity of Georgia has a letter in your folder in opposition to the bill with some suggested changes they want to see as well. They are testifying in front of another committee right now and couldn't be here and asked that I share the letter with everyone, so it's in your folder. Next person signed up to speak is Caitlin Barnes, Southern Center for Human Rights. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Caitlin Barnes. I'm the Public Policy Counsel for the Southern Center for Human Rights. For over 40 years, the Southern Center has worked to end mass incarceration, the criminalization of poverty, racial injustice, and the death penalty here in the state of Georgia. I'm grateful for the time to be here with y'all today. I'm very grateful to the sponsor of the bill and the chairman who have made time to hear our concerns. Southern Center is deeply concerned about the impact and implications of Senate Bill 171. This bill targets people who are exercising their First Amendment rights by expanding criminal penalties for protesters, imposing civil liability on local governments, and authorizing violence against protesters. For these reasons, Southern Center opposes this bill. In listening to some of the discussion and in thinking about this bill, I have sort of a single outstanding question that I hope the committee will consider before passing the bill today. And that question is, what gaps in the law is SB 171 seeking to fill? I want to focus on two particular features of the bill that would certainly be harmful if passed, but I would argue are also unnecessary. First, I'd like to start with the provision that has already gotten some discussion, this affirmative defense that starts at line 99 on page 5. This bill creates an affirmative defense to excuse the injury or death of a protester who's obstructing a highway. As an initial matter, this provision is unnecessary as Georgia already has laws that justify the use of force in when a person is defending themselves or someone else. So I would ask, what is deficient with our current self-defense laws that make this particular provision necessary? I also want to share that Southern Center in particular is concerned about this provision because it would roll back the historic progress that was made just last year with the repeal of citizen's arrest, a separate law that similarly condoned vigilante violence against people living in Georgia. Second, so that's sort of the first piece. And I want to say that the amendments that have been recommended today certainly narrow that affirmative defense and have it a little bit more narrowly tailored, and we appreciate those amendments. But again, I'm still not sort of satisfied that this provision is necessary given our extensive permissive self-defense scheme here in Georgia. Lastly, I will just mention that we are certainly concerned with the many ways in which this bill enhances criminal penalties or creates new crimes for conduct associated with the exercise of First Amendment rights. Again, I ask, what gaps in our current criminal laws exist that SB 171 is filling? Much of the conduct that has been described by the sponsor and others in determining or in the advocacy and support of this bill, much of the conduct that's been described is already punishable by law in Georgia. In a memo that I think many of you have seen from us, we outlined a few current crimes that are punishable by law in Georgia: riot, inciting a riot, terroristic threats, and criminal damage to property in the second degree, among others, right? Aggravated assault, aggravated battery. These are all crimes that are already punishable. And so I just certainly am concerned about the expansion of criminal penalties, especially in an arena where we're talking about people's First Amendment rights. So that's all I have for today. I know others will be coming on to speak more about those First Amendment implications, but that's all I had.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Barnes. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next, we have Ms. Maisie Lynn Guertin, Georgia Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll be super fast. Ms. Barnes covered a lot of our concerns as well. And I did submit late last night, admittedly, to Chairman Robertson as well as yourself, just a few of our hopes about this bill, and that would be for the enhanced penalties in the bill to only enhance when the person is committing the felonious version of this new crime. So the new crime is codified as, I say new, the modified enhanced crime is 161133. And subsection C of that crime is a felony. The others are all misdemeanors. But when you go through the bill, there are several places where the commission of 161133 enhances other crimes, the sentencing on other crimes. And so our request is that you consider only enhancing when it's the felony that's happening in this 161133 context. And I do have language for that is tied to this LC. I could provide today if you're interested in it, but that's all we have to say.
All right. All right. Stop the clock. Cool. We have a question from Senator Rep.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. So basically, just listening to you, we already have codes and statutes and law that cover the things that are in this bill, such as if you should damage somebody's car or break a store window, right?
We do.
Okay. Thank you.
Are there any other questions from the committee? All right. Thank you, Ms. Guertin. Next, we have Kevin, and I can't read your handwriting. Is it Jokin? Oh, I was way off. Okay. With GLAHR?
The Georgia Latino Alliance for Human Rights.
There you go. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, everybody. Sorry. My name is Kevin Huachin. I'm a community organizer from the Georgia Latino Alliance for Human Rights. I'm from Tifton, Georgia, and I'm here to stand against SB 171. It's a clear attack on our First Amendment rights to gather and protest against injustices and grave harm inflicted on our communities. This bill is clearly meant to suffocate the demands of people for change, who are fighting for change. It is clear that this bill is meant to stop progress, and it is clear that this bill ignores all the cries for change. It is clear that this bill diminishes grassroots method of change. Let me say that for any harm against our community, the people of Georgia mobilized to vote, to speak in committee, to knock on doors, to talk to representatives, to talk to officials, to gather testimonies, to host town halls, to sign petitions and emails. All of these strategies bring about change, are important, and they're necessary. But in that kaleidoscope of methods also snugly fits the importance of protesting. See, this bill illustrates how proponents of it view protesters. In this bill, there is no regard as to why there is a necessity to protest. When all other strategies fail, when no representative will fight for change and ignore us, that is when protest is necessary. When black people are killed by police, when black youth are killed by police, and when they're unjustly incarcerated, when immigrant people are deported, I hope everybody in this room is walking alongside the mothers and the children of those people who are impacted, because with this bill, those are the people who we are turning our backs on, and that's when protest is necessary. Because there's not a sign at any protest, any mouth left speechless, any fist raised in the air, any road clogged up with the masses of people without a demand for change. And I'm not just talking about in theory. I'm talking about the need to protest the murder of, the need to protest stuff like the murder of Rashad Brooks, who was killed by a police officer in 2020 here in Atlanta. I'm talking about Jamarian Robinson, who was killed and shot not once, not twice, but over 70 times by police who were never found guilty. And I don't know what this has to do with places like Catala, Carrollton, Osceola, Tyrone, the origin of a lot of these representatives who support this bill, but it sounds like it's just to try to, it sounds like people who aren't from Atlanta, people who aren't black, and people who aren't from communities of color are trying to prevent progress here in the state of Georgia. And so I'm here to ask y'all to vote against SB 171 and prevent it from moving forward.
All right, thank you. Next speaker we have is Oscar Trevino, also from GLAHR. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Oscar Trevino. First, I want to thank the community for giving us opportunity to provide testimony on this bill. My name is Oscar Trevino. I'm a community organizer with the Georgia Latino Alliance for Human Rights. I am from Douglas, Georgia, and I stand against SB 171. Growing up in rural South Georgia, I rarely saw or heard about any protesting taking place. Although I would hear of protests here in Atlanta and other major cities across the country, where local residents were freely use their First Amendment rights to assemble and express themselves freely. This is a right which is guaranteed by the Constitution created in 1787. I'm here today to ask the committee to oppose and to not continue forward with this proposed bill. It is clear that SB 171 targets people who are looking for a change. It's clear that SB 171 will harm our communities and would tear us from exercising our First Amendment right. As a society, we all know that not everyone would be supportive of every policy, bill, or law that is introduced. I firmly believe that having a public assemblies, demonstrations, marches, and rallies empower people by showing them that there are thousands of people who think and have the same beliefs, or even have different beliefs. But that's what democracy is built on. SB 171 also grants immunity for people who can cause harm to protesters and imposes liability on cities and counties who should guarantee the free exercise of our constitutional rights, the freedom of speech, and the right to assembly. We as Georgia residents request the committee to oppose SB 171 since it encourages censorship by preventing any public expression of objection and or disapproval towards any idea, action, or action in the public space. That's it. Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you. Next, we have Giovanni Serrano, also a GLAHR. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I just want to say thank you for allowing me the time to share testimonies. My name is Giovanni Serrano. I am a community organizer with the Georgia Latino Alliance for Human Rights, GLAR. And we are here opposing Senate Bill 171. Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or the press, or the right of the people peacefully to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances, the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. SB 171 is a flagrant violation of the right to freedom of assembly and petition guaranteed by the First Amendment. The bill requires organizers to apply for a permit from all public bodies, including a mandatory review from local law enforcement and the locality's attorney. In April 2018, a community member who was counter-protesting violent Nazi groups in Newman was violently arrested by Coweta County. The community sued because the police not only violently arrested a community member, but also violated his rights to protest and wrongfully prosecuted him. This cost Coweta County $35,000 for violating our First Amendment. Therefore, requiring this local entity to review a permit to execute our First Amendment is outrageous. We have participated in many actions throughout the years. Some are reactionary, some have more planning. But we should not be subjected for approval. Not only that, but this legislation makes a target out of protesters who are only exercising the First Amendment right. SB 171 will lead to an increase of racial profiling from police, increase unlawful arrests, and increase the false claims of our efforts to assemble. Just like how our community member was unlawfully arrested on lies coming from local law enforcement. Let us not forget the March on Ferguson and how law enforcement ran roughshod over the First Amendment right of assembly, and Black Americans took the brunt of that beating. Even Dr. Martin Luther King, in his letter from Birmingham jail, asserted that the city's ordinance denies citizens the First Amendment privilege of peaceful assembly and protest. And in his speech, "I've been to the mountaintop," delivered just prior to his assassination, he proclaimed, "Somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the greatness of America is the right to protest for rights." Let us also not forget that SB 171 is an attack to those protests, criminalizes protesters, violates our civil liberties. SB 171 empowers and protects those who plan to hurt us when we are demanding justice. Just imagine if one of your family members was hurt and the perpetrator was protected by the same bill that you vote in favor of. There would not be no need to demand justice if the government truly executed justice for all. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next, we have Ms. Cindy Battles, Policy and Engagement Director.
Chairman Strickland, with your permission, I'd like to defer my time to Chris Bruce, CLE.
Okay, and stop the clock for 1 second. We have 10 minutes and 56 seconds remaining on here, and we do just have 1, 2, 3, 4, counting Chris, not counting you, just 4 other speakers, so we can get done if everybody can look at the time we have remaining and do a little math.
If that does happen, I am happy to go last.
Okay.
But
I appreciate it.
there are really important points that ACLU
Yeah.
the City of Atlanta is going to make that I want to make.
All right, thank you, Ms. Battles. I appreciate you.
I was about to say, that's so kind of Cindy. I would like for the City of Atlanta to go first.
Well, now I'm going to start running the... Y'all keep arguing about who's going to speak next. I'm going to start the clock again.
Because I was the youngest child in my family, I'm going to take that.
On a serious note, I know we've had a lot of conversation about this bill. A lot of us have, and I appreciate the engagement you guys have all had. A lot of it is a team effort. I just want to make sure people that came to be heard today could be heard. So I appreciate the work y'all are doing with this. So who do I have in front of me?
Kenyatta Mitchell, I know.
All right, Ms. Mitchell.
Kenyatta Mitchell, Director of Intergovernmental Affairs for the City of Atlanta. I'm going to be very brief. First, I want to say I agree with all the speakers before me. But what I want to speak to is where the City of Atlanta intersects in this bill. Being the capital city, we are the most likely to have such protests, on either side of the aisle. It is our fear that the waiving of sovereign immunity against the City of Atlanta is just an open checkbook against us. Sovereign immunity is one of the things that allows us to function as a government. And once you breach that veil, that opportunity to say, we're the government, we can't be sued for something that you've done, it makes it very difficult for us to function as a city. And it makes it even more difficult for us to function as a capital city. We are the capital city. We bring in millions of people from around the world and we have no idea, no way to stop protest in that way. So we do our best. We have police forces. We have all those things available. But once you start saying that we have to both pay for the police force and then pay for anything that individuals do, it makes it very difficult for us to proceed as a city. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Mitchell. The next person I had was Larry Ramsey, going back on the list with ACCG General Counsel. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, members of the committee, and I will also try to be brief. I've spoken to the committee before about this bill. There are 3 provisions that I'd like to mention as from the standpoint of ACCG's concerns. The first is lines 78 to 81, and this is the first of 2 provisions of this bill that create new causes of action against counties and cities in the state. And in that first case, it's the local government can be sued if it's grossly negligent in allowing violence during an assembly. Well, assembly is defined in that same code section which is a criminal code section, but this is a civil cause of action embedded therein. Assembly is defined to include 2 or more people assembling even in private, on private property and in private assemblies. You heard a mention of auditorium, etc. This provision and the provision that's at lines 134 to 142, the other one that creates a cause of action against local governments, are putting local governments in the posture of being an insurer of public safety. Now, certainly public health, safety, and welfare are the key functions of us at the local government level, the state as well. It's kind of the formulation of the police power. And certainly we take it incredibly seriously at the county level to provide for public safety. But the law has always been, back through the common law, that the government is not an insurer of public safety. These 2 new causes of actions are moving us in that way, that you're going to have 2 new categories of litigation against local governments where someone is injured. The other point I would make on those 2 causes of action is that in the county context particularly, as most of you know, 146 of our 159 counties, the law enforcement is provided by the sheriff, and the counties cannot dictate to the sheriff how they provide law enforcement services. They get to fund the sheriff. And in that second cause of action, I think one of the things we would see by this legislation would be disputes as to whether the county is providing sufficient finances, resources to the sheriff to provide reasonable law enforcement. Another endless stream of litigation that we expect would come from both of these causes of action. The other piece that I wanted to mention in the bill, and again, I appreciate the committee's time, lines 116 to 133, this is, you've heard people talk about the permitting scheme. This would require each county and city to set up a permit process anytime 2 or more people want to assemble on public property. That could be public sidewalks and the courthouse steps. And I can tell you that most counties don't have this type of permitting infrastructure in place. So this would require counties to create this new bureaucratic step to require permits for people assembling 2 or more on county property. Turn those around within 3 days, including a review by attorneys and the public safety personnel. And as most of you know, I'm sure we have, as other speakers have spoken to, First Amendment concerns here. And so I'm concerned that many counties would be in the posture of trying to balance this state law requirement to have a permitting scheme, and then also trying not to tread on citizens' First Amendment and Georgia free speech rights, particularly in traditional public forums like sidewalks, like courthouses. So again, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your time and the committee's time.
All right, thank you, Mr. Ramsey. The last person on the list we've not had opportunity to speak, who's not had opportunity to speak, is Kareem El Hassing? Okay. And with Cairga, I'm sure you'll tell us who you're with. Good afternoon.
Thank you.
And just so you aren't wondering how much time you have 5 minutes on the clock still, so we're good.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Strickland. My name is Kareem El Husseini. I'm the Director of Government Affairs with CARE Georgia. CARE is the largest Muslim civil rights organization in the country, and I'm here representing the thousands of Muslims who live in the state. I'm here to express our opposition to SB 171 and ask that the committee vote no on this bill. Civil disobedience, the right to protest, to air grievances against the government, are a sacred part of being American. Our country was born in the protests of 1765 to 1776. Large crowds assembled around Liberty trees and Liberty poles, hanging British officials in effigy, and thousands of people paraded through the streets of colonial towns, voicing local dissent against British taxes and other measures they considered oppressive. Less than 100 years ago, brave men and women of this state took to the streets and staged various acts of civil disobedience to protest segregation in the South. Despite this rich history, instead of embracing the recent rise in public demonstrations and finding ways to protect people who are calling for justice and accountability from our government, Georgia senators have introduced SB 171, a bill that would criminalize lawful protest in violation of the U.S. and Georgia constitutions. Instead of addressing legitimate needs facing Georgians, like addressing our mass incarceration problems, we're all here debating a bill that would curtail our constitutionally protected rights. Even now, as I speak, truckers from all around the country are gathered in our nation's capital, doing loops around the Capitol Beltway, tying up traffic, all to protest the government-imposed COVID-19 protocols. If SB 171 were to pass, the truckers' protest would very likely be unlawful if it happened in this state. One thing about the way this bill is written, it applies to any assembly that turns violent. It doesn't have to be a protest. That includes 4th of July parades, a World Series parade, even the Taste of Atlanta. Also, this body just passed a bill allowing permitless gun carry for all Georgians because it is their constitutional right. This bill now requires Georgians to get permits to demonstrate, which is also our constitutional protected right. I'm asking you to do everything in your power to protect our sacred right to protest and to vote no on this bill. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Ms. Battles, you and Mr. Bruce want to fight over who's going to close us out?
If I take 1 minute, can he have the other one?
Sure, come on up, Mr. Bruce. Why don't you come sit with her if you want? There you go.
Oh, we have 3 minutes. So my name is Cindy Battles, and I am the Policy and Engagement Director with the Georgia Coalition for the People's Agenda. And the reason that I wanted to talk to y'all today is because from the beginning, when we started hearing about this bill, the example that was given was the protest after the shooting of Rayshard Brooks that occurred at the corners of University and Pryor. Y'all refer to it as the Wendy's because someone who at one point knew Mr. Brooks allegedly set the restaurant on fire. So what I want to talk about a little bit is how this bill would impact what happened that day. First of all, that started off as a peaceful protest. I was there all day. In case anyone wonders, Senator Kim Jackson can verify that for me. We had a specific list of things that we wanted to happen, and this could have been de-escalated very quickly because the requests were simple. We ended up having 2 law enforcement in particular that over the period of the day created situations that escalated the situation, and this bill would not only give them permission to escalate those situations, but would incentivize them to do so. In addition, when it was a peaceful protest, it would give someone who decided that they wanted to run me over an affirmative defense for doing so. So if we're going to use this as the example, I think that we should also take this bill and compare it to how Wendy's or University and Pryor would have been impacted by that. And I would defer the rest of my time to Mr. Bruce.
Well, thank you, Cindy. Christopher
welcome.
Bruce, Policy and Advocacy Director, ACLU of Georgia. Jumping right into it, I want y'all to pay your attentions to lines 70 through 77. And the reason why I'm bringing that up is we're talking about lifestyle and quality of life. This is an entirely subjective type of standard that we're putting in there. And the vagueness within it really threatens the way that people who are assembling does not give them notice to really look into. So this bill threatens the First Amendment due to overbreadth and due process clause of the 14th Amendment due to vagueness. Just wanted to put you on notice for that. And again, we've talked about similar times of what happened in Florida with HB1 and how that's been not enforced by a federal judge. So thank you for your time for this committee, and we're open to questions. Let me add one more thing. Give me this.
40 seconds, you got
It's not that many times. I know. See, but it's more for questions. It's not many times that the ACLU of Georgia, all these great organizations come up and agree with other organizations like Americans for Prosperity and other groups. I know a lot of groups are looking at this bill seriously, talking about the First Amendment problems within it, as well as the criminal junctures within it. So I would love for this committee to take that into consideration.
All right. Thank you. Thank you both.
Thank
for
you.
helping with the scheduling too.
Yeah.
Senator Robertson, can you close us out in 2 minutes?
Yes.
We're going to start a clock on you too.
Thank you.
She said, "Are you serious?" I said, "Yeah."
I feel I should be held to the same standard as the other individuals that got up here and spoke, because what this bill does is it protects those individuals that want to go out and protest peacefully. I myself, who have been part of teams that have managed protests of up to 20,000 people, realize the importance of everybody to get their view out, to get their point of view out, whether I agree with it or not. I myself have received permits from multiple cities in the state of Georgia to go out and protest and to picket. And I proudly stood on the lines with my brothers and sisters and did protest and picket. We made sure that before we got there, the risk assessments had been done by the public safety in that community. Public Works have come out there and made sure there were plenty of porta-johns, trash receptacles, and other things. So what this bill does is it protects the right of any Georgian to go out there and exercise their First Amendment rights under the Constitution of the United States of America about any issue they choose to without fear of being assaulted or hurt. And what it also reminds cities like Atlanta that citizens pay taxes and public safety is a primary responsibility of a city, and they cannot tell their public safety, whether it's fire and EMS or whether it's law enforcement, to stand down when their citizens need them the most. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, any final questions for the author? All right, Senator Kirkpatrick.
So, Senator, the chairman had asked if you would entertain a change. Let me find the spot.
Would it be better if we got a motion on the bill and then get into the amendments?
Oh,
Is it all
okay.
about amendments? Okay.
Well, I was just going to ask him a question about it.
Well, let's get a motion
Okay.
on the bill, then we'll get into the amendments. What's the pleasure of the committee? So we have a motion to pass by committee substitute by Senator Hatchett. Do we have a second? Second. We have a second by Senator Kennedy. Any discussion? Well, before we do that, let's go to the amendments. Senator Kirkpatrick.
Thank you. My question was, the chairman had indicated on line 102 that, and you had said you might be receptive to adding the word imminent after "and" on line 102 and deleting property on line 103.
I was absolutely, I'm comfortable with that. Absolutely.
Okay, and then there was another spot that talks about property on line 74 of the sub, where it says violence against a person or property.
I mean, if you want to amend that, that's property of another, and I believe it's within such assembly, but that could very well be the property of someone who's there peacefully protesting. But I would, if that's an amendment you want to offer, I'll offer no opposition.
Okay, and do you want me to just?
Well, I think we need to take these one at a time. Why don't we back up? Let's look at the First Amendment you mentioned. Let me make sure everybody's clear. Adding the word imminent between and attack on line 102 and striking property or on line 103. Let council's giving the nod. Is that the amendment you want to offer first?
Yes.
Is there a second to that amendment? A second for Senator Watson. Any discussion? All those in favor of that amendment, please raise your hand. 4. Opposed to the amendment? So the rules require us to vote. Okay, you voting for the amendment? Okay, let's do it again. All those in favor of the amendment, please raise your hand. It's just the amendment. All right, do you understand the amendment?
I wasn't paying attention.
Okay, let me repeat it to make sure. Hey, candor is good. Let me repeat the amendment. I want to make sure we're all clear. So looking at line 102, adding the word imminent between and attack. And then striking on line 103, property or. I'm doing that together because it's the same section. Does everybody understand the amendment? Yes. And there's a motion on that and a second. Let's try one more time. All in favor of the amendment, please raise your hand. All right, it's unanimous. All right. Now let's get to the second discussion you had, Senator Kirkpatrick. Are you wanting to offer that other amendment? Let me go back to you.
There was just one other spot in the bill that referred to property as opposed to person, and that was on line 74.
Okay. And so I think what you're saying is you would remove.
Delete or property.
I think you would have to say or property of another within such assembly, correct?
If that's what my chairman thinks is the right way to do it.
Mr. Chairman, for it to be specific, I think or property of another would be better than to remove within such assembly.
Correct. I think
Because
you're
of-
right.
Yes, sir.
So Legislative Council, have you comment on just the language there?
If you are going to remove of another, I would recommend then changing the in front of person to a. So it would read violence against a person within such assembly. Or you could say against the person of another within such assembly, although that would be somewhat archaic. So my recommendation would be change the in front of person to a and strike or property of another on line 74.
And so, Senator Robertson, to be clear, as the author of the bill, do you have a position on that potential amendment?
I'm comfortable with that amendment.
Okay. Does everybody understand the amendment that Senator Kirkpatrick is offering? Is there a second on that amendment? Second by Senator Watson. Any discussion? All in favor of the amendment, please raise your hand. It's also unanimous. Did you have any other amendments, Senator Kirkpatrick?
I've got more, but I'm not sure I'm ready to. I've got a whole page full of notes, so.
Okay. Does anybody from the committee have any other amendments they want to offer at this time? All right, so we have motion to pass by committee substitute as amended on the floor. All those. Any discussion on the bill? Senator Kirkpatrick.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. There was one other thing that on line 70, I believe, that apparently there's a Supreme Court language that's slightly different than what's in the bill. And it would then read, starting on line 70, after threat that is, it would say severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive, and indicates imminent physical harm, period. I'm not sure if that's, okay.
Is that one of the amendments offered by the Americans for Prosperity Group?
Yes.
It's in our folder? Okay.
And now I'm comfortable with that.
Okay. Is it going to be easier for us to refer to the notes from the group they gave us?
I think it would be.
And so can you refer us to the, I see, under free speech assembly language, section 3, page 4, lines 70 through 72, but I believe they are working off the correct substitute. Sludge Council have this?
I do, thank you.
Okay, do you want to give us thoughts on whether or not we're doing that correctly?
Mr. Chairman, to be clear, that would replace lines 70, 71, and 72, correct?
That's how I'm reading it.
Yes, sir.
That is how it appears to be written here.
Yes, sir, and I'm very comfortable with that. We did meet with them concerning that phrase.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And so to be sure we're clear, we'd be replacing lines 70 through 72, excuse me, after the words the assembly of two or more persons, everything else will be struck on lines 70 through 72 and replaced with who convey any threat that is so severe, pervasive, or objectively offensive and specifically directed to inciting or producing imminent lawless action. Is that the appropriate language, Legislative Council?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Is that what you're offering, Senator Kirkpatrick?
Yes.
Okay. Does everybody understand the proposed amendment? Is there a second? Second by Senator Parent. Any discussion? All those in favor of the amendment, please raise your hand. Also unanimous. All right. Any other amendments from the committee? All right. We're back now to the underlying motion to pass by committee substitute now as amended. Any further discussion from the committee? Senator Parent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for the record, just wanted to note this legislation. You know, as noted by the ACLU, it's kind of rare to have the left wing against the bill, the right wing against the bill, the cities against the bill, the counties against the bill, the defense lawyers against the bill, and no testimony in favor of it. And meanwhile, as noted, it's already been enjoined right away in the state of Florida. So I just wanted to put that into the record. So I don't think it's wise to pass this particular piece of legislation based on those facts that I just delineated. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Senator Parent. Senator Rhett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to state that I have a genuine concern about the liability to municipalities when it comes to this bill, and I'll just leave it at that.
All right, any further discussion from the committee? We have a motion to pass by committee substitute as amended. All in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. We have four. All opposed? We have 3. The motion carries. Thank you. Thank you for everyone that worked on this bill, even those that opposed it, that offered suggestions to make it better. I appreciate everyone's leadership on this. All right, going back on the agenda, Senator Brass, we have Senate Bill 552, LC 441990. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for having me in today. And this bill's simple. Coweta County Circuit, or the Coweta Circuit, currently has 7 Superior Court judges, and we are ranked 4th on the list on caseload, and the top 3 have moved forward with bills on adding judges, and so I'm simply moving forward trying to add a judge for the Coweta Circuit. As you know, with the pandemic, caseloads are a little bit behind, and just trying to get them some help.
All right, is this something that's in the state budget, or you're working to have in the state budget?
Yes, I've made that request in both the House. I've got House members making that request, or have made that request in the House, and I have made that request with our Appropriations Chairman in the Senate. And
this will be effective January 1st, 2023, is that right?
Yes, sir. That's on line 23.
All right. Any questions for Chairman Brass? All right, no one has signed up to speak on the bill. What's the pleasure of the committee? We have a motion to pass by Senator Kirkpatrick and a second by Senator Hatchett. Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. We're all back together again. It's unanimous.
That's what I do, Mr. Chairman. I bring people together.
We just all love judges, I guess.
Thank you.
All right, the next 3 bills on the agenda are my bills. I'm hoping to be quick with. I'm going to bring up our Secretary of the Committee, Senator Kennedy. Can you come chair the meeting? Let me go down here since I have 3 of them. Don't do too good a job and try to be a comparison to me.
No risk of that.
You like them all, right? I mean, I could have presented.
All right. Chairman Strickland, you want to present, is it SB 565? The floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm working off a substitute y'all have, which is LC 490935S. It's a pretty simple bill, just some brief, make sure I'm presenting the right one, brief background on this issue. You may recall, I think it was 3 years ago now, when I was a full leader for Governor Kemp, I carried a bill that set forth the ability of those that have been convicted of crimes as a direct result of being a victim of human trafficking to have a process to go and file for a vacature where they will actually apply to Superior Court and can, if they can prove with the correct evidence that that they were a victim at the time they committed an offense, and that offense was convicted as a direct result of being a victim, they could actually have their sentence vacated, which is the strongest thing you could do under the law. Once you've been sentenced, it actually completely goes away, and you were able then to apply to get fines and fees that you paid returned to you. The law just says you will have them returned to you. This is simply some cleanup on that language. There's two things we're addressing in this bill. First is we had it in the current draft to where if you, if it is a misdemeanor, you have to wait until 6 months after you complete your sentence to even petition for the vacature. If it's a felony, you had to wait 1 year after you complete your sentence to petition. First thing I'm doing in the bill is eliminating that waiting period, because this is such a strong standard you have to meet anyway, and you are a victim of human trafficking that can prove your crime was committed as a direct result of being a victim. It doesn't make a lot of sense, in my opinion, as someone even worked on the issue now, for someone to have to wait until they finish a sentence to even petition for this. So we're eliminating that waiting period, if you will, under the first section. The second part of the bill, we were not clear in the original language as to where the fines and fees you're being reimbursed are going to come from. And I've heard from advocates, and in particular some attorneys that have carried and done some of these cases pro bono for victims, and there's confusion, there's not uniformity as to how we get the money back. You know, when you pay a fine or a fee, you may pay it to a clerk and it gets distributed from there. So I've worked with our friends from the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council trying to find language where we can direct how we can get the money returned. I'll tell you, we worked on some additional language today trying to get this right and trying to set forth a process where the entities have to work with each other that may have the money. I've committed everybody involved that we may even look at cleaning this up even more if this bill moves today as we go hopefully to the House with this bill as well. Last part of the bill just clarifies lines 89 through 91 while we're in here about the ability for not just the defendant but also petitioner and expert witnesses to testify by remote electronic means. We just had defendant, any other party. We weren't clear about other witnesses as well. That's all the bill does. Senate Bill 565. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Chairman. Are there any questions? All right, no questions. Do we have anyone signed up? Here? Ms. or Beatrice Shakal?
Thank you, members of the committee. My name is Beatrice Schockel, and I'm the Director of Alliances for the Frontline Policy Action. And I'd like to thank Chairman Strickland for bringing this bill to committee, and we stand in support of Senate Bill 565. And Frontline Policy Action, one of our 7 core values is to respect the dignity of every human being. And so that means fighting for the value and respect of each human life. And this bill reaffirms the dignity of victims in human trafficking who are forced into crimes that they didn't even want to be put into. And so them being convicted is just something that is a trauma to them, and it's something that we want to erase that trauma as fast as possible. So let's not make this any more difficult, and let's heal this ordeal and allow their conviction to be vacated right away. And so I do ask for swift approval of Senate Bill 565. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for the witness? All right, seeing none. That's all the presentation and testimony that we have. Oh, I'm sorry, do we have no? All right, that must be just a wild flashing microphone. All right. What's the pleasure of the committee? Got a motion for due pass. Is there a second? And we've got a second. All right. Any further discussion? Chairman Strickland, any further comments you'd like to make?
No, sir.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. We've got a motion and a second. No discussion. All those in favor of the motion do pass? 6. All those against? All right. It's unanimous.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right. Next bill, Chairman Strickland, SB 576.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Continue the theme of cleaning up past things that we did. I will try to keep this as simple as I can, though when you read it, it does look a little bit complicated, but I promise it's actually a really simple bill. There's a provision under our law that allows a family member, which is defined as a grandparent, great-grandparent, or aunt or uncle, under limited circumstances to petition for visitation rights for a grandchild, niece or nephew, or great-grandchild. And these are situations where there's a really high standard once you get into court, where you have to prove that the child's health or welfare will be harmed if visitation is not granted. It's designed to where you have someone that helped raise a family member, and then because of disputes in the family, that person that stood in for the parent gets completely shut out. That's existing law. It's something that I also worked on several years back. But there's two categories of these cases, and we're going to address the second category. One is your typical case that you can't see in front of you in the bill here, that's in the section prior to this in the law, where you have this family member petitioning, where you have two parents that are still in the picture. They're still alive, they're not incarcerated or incapacitated at least. And you have a very tough standard I mentioned, the clear and convincing evidence standard. You have to prove health or welfare of the child will be harmed if visitation is granted. This is all based on federal constitutional and state constitutional law that gives great deference to the rights of parents over other family members. So you have this very tough standard to meet. The second way you can petition is where a parent is deceased, incarcerated, or incapacitated. Our current law, as you see in front of you here, under this section D of the current law, has a different category here, where in the current law you can just show that it's in the best interest of that child to have visitation with you. You can get visitation, so it's a lower standard. Your child is deceased and you want to see your grandchild. It's just a best interest of child standard. There was a 2018 Supreme Court case, Patton v. Artis, 304 Georgia 140, and that case found that second section to be unconstitutional because you aren't having to show the harm to the health or welfare of the child in order to get visitation. In other words, if you're going to stand in the place and take any rights away from parents, you have to show a really high standard of harm first. And so what I've done with this bill, Senate Bill 576, is try to address the Supreme Court case and that dealt with this section of the law. And while leaving this law there, leaving a separate category for a situation where a parent's no longer in the picture, we've added the same finding of harm, the same evidentiary standard, and the same presumption that's all in the previous law to revive this section of the grandparent visitation law. When we're done with this, there's really two ways that this will be different than a typical grandparent visitation case. One is, and this is all based on the language on line 15 of the existing law, notwithstanding the provisions of subsections B and C. That's the previous sections of the grandparent visitation law. The other parts that will make this different is you have less limitations on the number of actions that could be filed. You don't have to wait every 2 years to file an action. You could still file an action in the same year that another action for visitation is pending. And the other way this is different is the second part of it is where you don't have to prove that the parents are no longer together. So the current grandparent visitation law, the first section, says you cannot file an action when two parents are still together raising a child. The problem you have is you have a parent that's passed away, and I'm going to give you a story as to where this came from. A parent has passed away. That parent remarries quickly to somebody else. That other parent adopts. Suddenly now someone filled in the shoes and is now the parent. And a parent of a deceased child would have no standing to actually go in and petition for visitation rights, even if they help raise that grandchild, if this parent remarries and has someone adopt. And so I hope I've explained that in a somewhat clear way. Keep the doctors give me a look. But this directly is trying to address the Supreme Court decision to revive this section to make it where those that help raise a child and help raise a grandchild, and their child has passed away, and their connection to their family for that grandchild is no longer present at all, they would still have standing to go into court and seek visitation rights. And with that, I'll be happy to answer questions and try to clear it up.
All right. Any questions for the author of the bill?
You're afraid.
Be afraid. Be very afraid.
I said if I actually could explain this, it would be simple. If I complicated it, it's going to sound complicated. I know. You're giving that look, Kay.
All right. I don't think we have any questions for the author, and we have no one signed up. Is there someone who wanted to speak on this bill that was not able to sign up or thought you did? And no? All right.
Wait too long.
Very good, yeah. All right. What's the pleasure of the committee on this bill? Got a motion to pass. And is there a second? Second. All right. Got a motion to pass and second. Any discussion or further discussion? Chairman Strickland, any other comments you'd like to make?
No, sir. I appreciate y'all indulging me on this.
Okay, very good. Thank you. All right, we've had a motion and a second. All those in favor of SB 576, raise your hand. All right. Any opposed? All right. It's unanimous.
No, I didn't vote. Oh, you want me to vote? I need to vote. I vote, sorry, in favor.
All right. There we go.
I didn't realize we lost somebody.
Does that give us the minimum we need?
Yes.
Great. Thank you for that. Thanks for catching that. All right.
Thank you, Ben.
Motion passes. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. All right, Chairman. What? One more?
All right.
SB, you got one more in you?
I don't know if I do or not, but I have a lifeline on this one, hopefully.
All right. SB
Mr.
577.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. McGinley, the district attorney from the Alcovey Circuit, is here as well and can explain this in a deeper way if I do as bad a job on this one as I did the last one. Senate Bill 577 is something that was brought to me by our prosecuting attorneys council, in particular, my district attorney out of Walton and Newton counties. And we are addressing our current law when it comes to vehicular homicide and serious injury by vehicle. This is where when you commit certain traffic offenses based on what that offense is, it could be a felony or a misdemeanor, and someone dies or someone gets seriously injured. We have certain code sections that we've looked at in past bills that address this. And looking at Section 1, under the current law, to make it first-degree vehicular homicide, which is the felony, then you have the current provisions where someone causes the death of another person with a vehicle while committing these crimes, which is illegally passing a school bus, reckless driving, a DUI, or fleeing or attempting to elude a police officer. Those folks, when they commit those offenses, they get in an accident, someone dies, then that's first-degree vehicular homicide. What is not included there is a code section that we've added on line 16, which is aggressive driving. And this is one of those things where you have an offense like aggressive driving where you actually have to target an individual. You have to have the intent to annoy, harass, molest, intimidate, and injure, or obstruct another person. Even though that is much stronger than definitely much stronger than reckless driving, which doesn't require you to target a person, maybe arguably not as strong as some of the other offenses we have here. That is not something that we see currently in the code section for first-degree vehicular homicide. I believe this is something that's been an oversight. I'm not sure there's any intention to do this, but if the committee wants to hear, there's actually a case, I believe, out of Walton County where this came up, and so all we're doing is adding aggressive driving on line 16, those offenses that'll make vehicular homicide a first-degree vehicular homicide. In that same theme, getting into Section 2 of the bill, we're now in the section dealing with serious injury by vehicle. And so the person doesn't die in the same situation, but they have a serious injury. We are matching the same provisions we have under the first degree for vehicular homicide, for our serious injury by vehicle law. So if you look on line 48, we are adding overtaking and passing a school bus. We are adding on line 49, fleeing or attempting to elude an officer. And we're once again adding on line 50, aggressive driving. And so this will be the first degree felony for serious injury by vehicle to be consistent with our vehicular homicide statute. Two other things this bill does on line 54. This is when someone commits the offense of serious injury by vehicle, but they flee from the scene. And the current law says the person has to know that the accident they were in resulted in bodily harm and leave the scene of the accident. And I think the prosecutors will tell you the challenge of proving that they actually knew that versus the standard of should have known, which we add on line 54. Now, to be clear, this is not a situation where someone should get caught in something that that is where they would have no reason to know there's serious injury. There's even a provision here in line 56 through 58 of the current law that says if you stop and exchange insurance information with someone, that gives you immunity from being prosecuted under this. We're trying to make sure we capture those that get in an accident and the prosecutor can prove beyond reasonable doubt that they should have known someone was seriously injured and they just ran from the scene. Last thing that we're doing, lines 61 through 67 of the bill, is we are adding the offense of leaving the scene of an accident while driving as an habitual violator, and increasing the punishment for someone who had their license suspended. So someone by law is an habitual violator of other offenses, and they commit the offense of driving. It commits the offense of serious injury by vehicle, and they have their license suspended. And we are actually increasing the punishment for those classes of individuals as well. With that, Mr. Chairman, that's what the bill does. And again, if there's any more technical questions, we have some folks here that want to be heard on the bill, I think.
All right. Thank you for a good presentation and background on that, Mr. Chairman. Are there any questions for the author? No questions. All right. Looks like we do have someone signed up. Randy McBeerley? McGimley.
My handwriting is terrible.
Yeah, well, it's late in the day. That's all right.
I want to thank the chairman for this bill, and I mean he's covered a good bit of it. I would just add a couple things and answer any questions. The point generally about the aggressive driving is that is just a more serious crime. It involves the state proving beyond a reasonable doubt a specific intent to, again, annoy, harass, molest, intimidate, injure, or obstruct another specific person. Reckless driving is a general reckless disregard of safety of a person or even property. And so it just appears to me, and we had a trial this year, or I guess it was last year, it was already 2022, where essentially, defense can argue, hey, my guy was just driving, he was committing aggressive driving. Find him guilty of that, which is a lesser crime because it would fall under second-degree vehicular homicide. Although, logically, it's a more serious crime when you read that. But the idea behind that is the defense can argue, hey, our guy was just driving aggressively. That's it, not driving recklessly. And the jury, in this specific case, when I spoke to the jurors afterwards, that was their confusion. They said, well, this guy was driving aggressively. It fit that specific statute. And that's what we decided to do versus driving recklessly. A couple other changes I think are just common sense changes. I think serious injury by vehicle and first-degree vehicular homicide should match each other because the purpose behind those statutes, the fact that illegally passing a school bus was not already under there. I think it just should be a serious injury by vehicle if someone passes a school bus illegally and causes a child to lose the use of their limbs the rest of their life. Currently, it's just the one statute they've done. They've passed the school bus illegally. And then lastly, I think with just one minor correction for the HV portion of serious injury by vehicle is not just if their license is suspended, it's if their license is revoked, which takes a number of serious traffic violations before your license is revoked. And that's something that is typically within a 5-year thing. You were declared a habitual violator, and if you seriously injure somebody while HV, I think that should be a more serious punishment. I think this body has, in the Senate and the House, have historically based punishments based on intent and the seriousness of the injury, and that's all we're asking to do. I'll answer any questions if the body or anybody has any questions to those points.
Thank you for being here. Any questions for the witness?
Oh, and
yes,
if
sir.
I may, I'm sorry, to add
Sure.
one thing, and this was something that I will say just even today, a number of DAs, no one offered any disagreement for this bill from the DAs. We have DAs from Lookout Mountain, Clayton, Coweta, Southern, Toombs, Cherokee, Waycross, Rome, Blue Ridge, Conasauga, Douglas, Chattahoochee, and Hall circuits that were all in full support of this bill, and that is across the state, all areas of the state, as well as all political sides of the aisle that are in support of this bill. So I'd ask that this committee pass this bill.
All right, very good. Any questions from the committee? No questions. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. Is there anyone else that wanted to speak to this bill? All right, seeing none. Mr. Chairman, you want to come forward? All right. What's the pleasure of the committee? We've got a motion to pass and a second. All right. Any further discussion? Any final comments, Chairman Strickland?
Yes, sir.
Okay, very good. All right. All those in favor of motion to pass Senate Bill 577, raise your hand. 7. Any opposed? None? All right. Carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Actually, I think we're out of time. We're going to go ahead and...
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Sorry.
I'm not sure if I had. All right. We are going back on the agenda. Item number 9, which is Senate Bill 599. Is Senator Hickman still, is he next door?
Senator Tillery's here.
I'm not ready for him. All right, let's move down to Senate Bill 227. Senator Jones, this is one that you want to stay up there because I think it should be pretty straightforward. This is one you presented to us previously, and you've worked on a substitute. We have LC 490930S, Senate Bill 227. Which mic are you? 5. I'll give you the floor. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is bringing back SB 227, substitute to it. There are a couple of changes that got made based on some concerns. Number one was that there was an issue about actually defining to make sure this was going to be commercial property and not, it couldn't be residential property. So what we did on line 13 and 14 was add or commercial property. So therefore, it would only be limited to commercial property. There would not be any residential property that could possibly be used. And then on page 4, another concern that we had was, what if you had a conveyance that was in a certain time period before the property is actually deemed blighted? And so what we did was said, okay, if you have a ownership conveyance of at least 50% or 50% or more within 2 years of it going to court and being deemed blighted, then that conveyance basically starts the process back over. Now, you'll only get a one-time chance to do that. So if you convey the property, so a person takes you to court in 2022, but the property was conveyed within 2 years of that, the court will say, look, this property might be deemed blighted. It's not going to be an order to deem it to be blighted property. The court in the order will say, because you've had this conveyance, you cannot condemn the property. You cannot do that. But we're going to put a note within the order to say, at least we see that it would be blighted property. So next time that it comes back up, which won't be for 10 more years at least, we'll know that this property would have been deemed blighted except for the conveyance. A couple of things to note about the conveyance is, number one, it does not have to be a purchase. So the conveyance does not have to be a purchase. That's first and foremost. So it's not forcing a sale. Second aspect of the conveyance is the person who has it or the company that has it still can maintain some ownership interest in the property. And that's the key. They're only going to up to 50% interest change. So they don't have to convey they don't have to convey all of their interest in the property. They can still have some ownership interest in the property, just not the majority interest in the property. So if that's the case, if a person came up in 2022 and that conveyance had taken place, they're actually going to get a restart. The person who gets that property gets a restart. And I think that's one of the concerns was, what if you had that conveyance and they're trying to do something with it? Now they come within the rubric of this statute. No, they're actually get a restart. If they've had that conveyance, that owner actually gets a restart. Another 10 years if it's totally vacant, and another 20 years if you're just talking about if it's less than 30% vacant. And that is what this substitute does, Mr. Chair.
All right. Thank you, Senator Jones. Any questions for him? All right. There's no one that signed up to speak on this bill. What's the pleasure of the committee? We have a motion to pass by Senator Rep by committee substitute. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a second by Senator Parent. Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. All right, 7. It passed unanimously. All right, going back on the agenda is Senator Hickman, Senate Bill 599. We're working off LC 442021. Do you have backup with you?
This is a little bit different than running back and forth. Running back and forth is kind of.
All right, hold on one second. So if you'll introduce yourself as well, and then I'll turn over the floor to you, Senator.
Okay. Okay. First of all, I'll introduce
Okay.
Jared in just a second.
Yeah.
But thank y'all for allowing us to be here today, Mr. Chairman and committee members. This is a short bill, but it's a very good bill. In fact, it affects all of our communities. Senate Bill 599. I'm going since it's a short bill, and we had some help from some of the senators on the committee with it. I'm going to read the crux of the bill and then some comments that I'm going to turn it over to Captain Akins to give the minutia of the bill. It says in here, a person who by intentionally discharging a firearm, and we put the word intentionally here because one of the committee members here said that his brother accidentally discharged a firearm, shot his daddy in the leg, and so we put the word intent. The person has to intentionally discharge a firearm in the direction of another person, causing bodily harm to or endangers the bodily safety of another person by consciously discharging a substantial and unjustifiable risk that his or her act will cause harm to or endanger the safety of any other person, and whose disregard constitutes a gross deviation from the standard of care which a reasonable person would exercise in the situation, shall be guilty of a felony. A person convicted of violating on page 2, a person convicted of violating subsection A of this code section, when no injury results, shall be punished by imprisonment for not less than 2 or more than 10 years. A person convicted of violating subsection A of this code section, when injury results, shall be punished by imprisonment for not less than 5 nor more than 10 years. The offense of violating subsection A of this code section shall not merge with any other offense. A person convicted of violating subsection A of this code section shall not be eligible for probation, parole, furlough, or work release. All acts and parts of laws in conflict with this act are repealed. Today I have with me Captain Jared Akins with the Statesboro Police Department, where I reside. Captain Akins has been with police, been in law enforcement 21 years. He's got a bachelor's in criminal justice and a master's in public administration. The reckless, intentional discharging of firearms is happening in all of our communities. If you live in your community and you think it's not happening, you're living with your head in the ground. It happens everywhere. It happens daylight. It happens at night. It happens after midnight. So it's a real issue. This bill, we vetted this bill by a good number of people that are involved with law enforcement. This bill has been read and supported by the Chief of Police Department in Statesboro, Chief Mike Broadhead. It has been read and supported by the Superior Court Judge and former Assistant District Attorney in Statesboro, Michael Muldrew, who was Assistant DA for 26 years. It has been read and supported by our current District Attorney, Daphne Gerald, and it's been read and supported by Assistant District Attorney Judith Oglesby and Assistant District Attorney Russell Jones. I'm going to now turn it over to Captain Akins to let him speak as what this bill means. Thank you.
And briefly, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you so much for giving me just a few minutes to kind of give you a little bit of background on the bill. Essentially, since 2020, obviously, and really previous to that, what we've seen is our incidents involving firearms uses, one group versus another, have tended to gravitate towards public spaces more than they ever have before. So you have commercial parking lots, bar parking lots, multifamily housing, those kind of things. And unfortunately, what that brings to these very densely packed and populated areas is a huge potential for collateral damage. When a round goes off course, it does not go where it's intended, and it strikes an innocent bystander, an innocent civilian. That's what keeps me up at night. The current method of prosecuting these cases is if we can identify the shooter, If we can identify the victim, then we can prosecute for aggravated assault, unless we have a non-cooperating victim, which unfortunately is a fairly frequent occurrence. Even if that person is injured, they may not present for treatment, so they may never be contacted by law enforcement. And the basis of the aggravated assault is the identification of that one person. So in a lot of these cases, we see the shots ring out, everybody scatters, and there's absolutely nobody left at the end of it. However, we've had a parking lot or an apartment complex that sustained damage, had bullets go through walls, or endangered the individuals who were on scene at the time the gunfire broke out. We had an incident a couple of weekends ago where 4 shooters at a convenience store parking lot, the bars dump, the parking lot fills up, 4 individuals have an altercation of some sort, and 23 shots later, everyone's scattered and gone to the wind. So we don't actually have a victim remaining on scene to prosecute anybody for the aggravated assault. If we can't do the ag assault, then what we wind up having to rely on is the misdemeanor reckless conduct statute, so that they endangered the safety of other persons that were in that parking lot at the time that the gunfire broke out. Unfortunately, that's a very unsatisfying way to prosecute a case which had so much potential for tragedy. Again, that's a misdemeanor, 1 year in jail and a $1,000 fine. In the case I just referred to with the 4 individuals in the parking lot at the time, we have identified one of those individuals, but we don't know who he was actually shooting at because nobody remained on scene to actually participate in that prosecution and investigation. So we've charged him with a misdemeanor. Unfortunately, I don't know that there's much deterrence in the misdemeanor for committing a crime that has so much potential to harm others. So that's what this bill is intended to do, is to bridge the gap between the high standard of the aggravated assault and what we have to prove in court, and the far lower standard but lower punishment of the misdemeanor reckless conduct, if that makes any sense. So something to where we can levy a sanction on people who are completely disregarding the safety of those groups into which they're firing or through which they're firing. So if that makes any sense, and I'd certainly be happy to elaborate on it, but we just wanted to build on the existing reckless conduct statute to give it more teeth and to give our detectives and prosecutors more ammunition, for lack of a better term, to prosecute people who are essentially wantonly doing these in public.
Is it Mr. Aiken? Is that correct?
Yes.
Couple questions I had. Other committee members have questions. First off, if there's no victims left on the scene, will you still be able to prosecute somebody under this new law, looking at line 11, that requires a person to intentionally discharge a firearm in the direction of another person that causes bodily harm or endangers? I get or endangers, the person may not have to be there, but how do you prove that it was in the direction of somebody else, that there's no other witnesses?
Generally, we have video surveillance of these locations, especially the ones that we frequently respond to and have these incidents at. So we've arranged with public and private partners to install cameras in a lot of the locations, so we can show that the firearm was directly discharged towards somebody. We just have no idea who that somebody is, and they don't remain on scene to tell us.
The other question I had, you have language on lines 21 through 22 that prevent this offense from merging with another offense, and then you have lines 23 and 24 that prevent somebody from being parole eligible or for having probation, furlough, or work release. They're two separate things, but why were those parts important to you?
The concern that I had, and I think some of the people that we discussed it with, was that we did not want this just to be another law that could be subsumed in a plea deal. There had to be some sort of backstop, or we wanted there to be some sort of backstop to enable this to be a standalone charge on its own that would not be, pled down or dismissed in exchange for some sort of negotiated plea on another charge, in order to give it enough bite to really have its effect. Now, I'm not an attorney by any means. That is the hope, or that would be the hope on the law enforcement angle. But obviously, if there's a legal issue with it, then that would be something that we would defer to our betters on.
Okay, thank you. Question from Senator Kirkpatrick.
Yeah, thank you. My question is, I'm really surprised this isn't covered somewhere else in the law, because it's an odd place to put it with the, the HIV stuff, and there's one other thing. It just seems, I just want to be sure it isn't already covered in our law. And the other thing is, I don't understand what a furlough is and how that fits in to the conversation.
And the attorneys would probably be better to weigh in on the legal definition of a furlough than I am. But essentially, they would have to serve the sentence day to day instead of having parts of it probated or being released early for whatever sentence they were given as part of those statutes. As far as whether it's covered any other place in OCGA, I've never seen anything that mirrored that language. The reckless conduct was a good fit because essentially what they're doing in a public space is acting in such a manner that they endanger the safety of others in that, which is fairly close to what the misdemeanor reckless conduct statute is. Again, the elements of ag assault, what we have to prove, are far more significant than that. So it just seemed to be a natural place to put it given the language of the existing statute.
Are any other questions from the committee? Okay, thank you. There are others that want to be heard on the bill. Oh, I'm on the wrong one. We have Maisie, Lynn, Guertin with Georgia Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. I say others. You're the person that want to be heard on the bill. I was looking at the wrong sheet.
I'm surprised my friends at PAC aren't going to have anything to say.
That'd be nice.
That would be nice. Thank you, Chairman. So I would agree with what you were starting to ask about with respect, especially to the version of this crime that requires an injury, that we do have laws in the books, Senator Kirkpatrick, that cover this in the cases that I've been involved in and know about. Although I would say this is where I would defer to PAC on how much of a problem this is statewide to secure aggravated assault convictions in these scenarios. I did hear the testimony, and I understand that there may be some problems, but it's not something that we've been aware of. We have plenty of clients being sentenced for aggravated assault throughout this state. But if you have a victim, you would also have an aggravated battery. You've got an aggravated assault. I'm sorry, when you have a victim, we have an injury. You would have potentially an aggravated battery, especially if it was caused by gunfire, and you would have an aggravated assault. With respect to the lack of merger in this bill, our biggest concerns about this particular legislation is the lack of merger and the lack of any kind of probation, parole, furlough, or work release. For merger, in situations where a lesser crime merges up with a greater crime, the sentencing exposure on that greater crime is typically pretty large. So for instance, if you're talking about some behavior that would merge into aggravated assault because it's the same act happening, like let's say a battery might merge in with an aggravated assault depending on how it was charged, the aggravated assault is going to give you 20 years worth of sentencing exposure compared to the misdemeanor battery. And especially when we consider the fact that this legislation is making a felony out of what is arguably in some of these situations currently a misdemeanor. The officer mentioned, for instance, 1611-103, which is when you unlawfully discharge a gun within a certain distance of a public road. We also have 1611-102, which is pointing a pistol at another person. And he's correct in stating to you all that those are misdemeanor charges. And part of the reason why we have graduated punishments is because we have graduated, the aggravation in these crimes is graduated. So by the time you get to where someone's actually injured, we have plenty of felonies on the books to accommodate that sentencing and punishment need. With respect to the lack of any kind of probation, parole, furlough, or work release, as a matter of policy, we would posit that it is never a good idea to have someone max out of an incarceration sentence. It's okay. It's never a good idea for someone to max out of an incarceration sentence. The structure that we have with something like probation and parole allows for supervisory oversight of a person as they're re-entering society. And so just having that backstop support, whether that means it helps them to get employment or housing or any other things that help to make them more stable in our community, having max out sentences is just, it's not good policy. And I would ask that you consider at least, if nothing else, removing lines 21 through 24 of this bill so that as a matter of policy, we're recognizing that
we have voluminous sentences available for the more aggravated crimes, and as a policy matter, supervision is better on the back end of a prison sentence. I'd stand for any questions that you have.
I have one question. If you probably do know this. If not, I'll ask Ben or Michael. What is the punishment for ag assault? Is it consistent with the 5 to 10 years?
It's actually greater.
Okay.
So the rule of lenity would actually, that's why I don't mind if you pass this bill to some extent, because that's why I'm asking for the particular lines to be removed. That's why I also expected Path might testify, because in some fact scenarios, the rule of lenity, this is a better deal for my clients, and we'll take it.
All right, any other questions on the committee? Is anybody else that wants to be heard on the bill? All right, I share the concern about, with the new offense being created, the lack of the ability of merging, and also the mandatory minimum that we put in this. And I do think that's something we ought to think about as a committee, that with being a new offense, with the goal being, as you stated, the situation where someone can't be charged with anything else but a misdemeanor, this will step in and give a felony charge you could make, but then it would address the concerns if we took that out, with this being stacked on top of other charges potentially. It's just my thoughts, but no one else signed up to be heard on the bill. What's the pleasure of the committee? Do we have a motion to pass? Senator Tillery.
Mr. Chairman, I think the appropriate process for amendment is we'd have to do a motion to pass first, correct?
That's correct. Are you making that motion?
I'll make a motion to pass for the purposes of...
We have a motion to pass by Senator Tillery. Is there a second? We have a second by Senator Kennedy. At this point, does anybody want to offer any amendments? Senator Watson.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to make an amendment to strike lines 21 through 24.
All right. Is there a second for that amendment?
Second.
We have a second from Senator Parent. Any discussion on that amendment? Yes, sir. Legislative Counsel.
Mr. Chairman, if I could recommend a conforming change in lines 3 and 4 of the title, you would, as a result of that amendment, you would also want to delete "to prohibit merger of offenses," "to prohibit probation and other alternatives to incarceration."
Okay. Does everybody understand the amendment? Are you good with adding that to your amendment, Senator Watson? All right. Any further discussion on the amendment? All those in favor, please raise your hand. This is on the amendment itself. Is unanimous? 8, right? Is that where we are now? 8-0. All right. Now we're back on the underlying bill. Any other amendments? Our underlying motion to pass as amended. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. 1. We have 6. All those opposed? 2. All right. Motion carries. Thank you. Thank you for working on this with us. All right. Going back on the agenda, we are at Senate Bill 504. Senator Robertson. We are working off LC 280460. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Don't take quite as long this time.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, this is a very simple piece of legislation. It's an adjustment. This was brought to our attention during a public safety hearing where it was brought out that individuals continually go back and want to add and take away from certain pieces of legislation. And this particular piece was brought up concerning Title 17, which we did a couple of years ago, relating to bail-restricted offenses. All this bill does is move the few felonies that are left out of bail-restricted offenses, which a quick reference would include sexual misconduct on a child under 16, felony obstruction of law enforcement officer, extortion, bribery, RICO, felony theft by taking, fraud, and forgery into line. And what this does is give the judges the opportunity to assess a bond on these felony offenses. And that bond, as you know, can be anywhere from $1 to $1 million or beyond or no bond at all. But we've spoken to those in the judiciary as far as judges and what they have asked for. They like the legislation because they said they want bright lines. Takes away clerks and others from having to pull menus out to look up different offenses to try to determine what the bond amounts, whether they have a bond, whether they can be done a signature bond or a recognizance bond. So basically what we're requiring now is that all felonies have some type of security bond attached to them. And with that, I'll yield to any questions, sir.
You have a question from Senator Watson?
Yes, sir.
Just at the appropriate time, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Appropriate time for what? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I ran through that because I know your time is late and your.
Well, if you keep doctors late, they just make motions. I'm not sure what the motion is going to be, but.
Well, just remember, we need them more than they need us.
That's true. Okay. Any questions from the committee? All right. We have people that have signed up to speak. First, we have Coco Pappy from the Deep Center. She had to leave. Okay. She had to leave. All right. Next, we have Ms. Caitlin Barnes again from the Southern Center for Human Rights. Good evening. Thanks for sticking with us.
Again. Thanks for having me again. I won't take up too much time. I want to start by clarifying some things about bond and the bond determination. That I think it's worth sort of reminding the committee about the purpose of bond and the purpose of cash bail. Imposing financial obligations on as a condition of pretrial release for every felony has really nothing to do with public safety. Mandating cash bail will allow wealthy people to purchase their freedom while requiring those without adequate financial resources to remain in jail at the expense of taxpayers. At the stage of the criminal legal process when SB 504 would become relevant, a person has only been charged with a crime. They have not been tried, nor have they been convicted of the crime for which they will be detained pre-trial if they can't afford to purchase their freedom. We are therefore required to presume that they are innocent. Furthermore, if the judge is considering conditions of bond, which include but are not limited to financial obligations like cash bail, then the judge has already determined that this person qualifies for pretrial release. In determining whether to release a person pretrial, one of the 4 factors that a judge must consider is whether the person poses any significant threat or danger to any person, to the community, or to any property in the community. So the people that we're talking about who would be impacted by SB 504 if it were to become law, 1, must be presumed innocent, and 2, have already been found by a judge not to pose a significant risk to public safety. Regardless of that fact, for all felony charges, a list of offenses that grows every year, 504 would mandate that this person be held in jail unless they can purchase their freedom. The sheer breadth of this policy change will carry significant consequences, certainly for the people who are detained pretrial because of it, but also for local governments and for the criminal legal system. First, it's our understanding that as drafted, this bill would prohibit a person charged with any felony offense from taking advantage of pretrial diversion programs. Second, people who are detained pre-trial suffer collateral consequences, including the loss of employment, the loss of housing, and separation from family and their children. Third, this will further burden local jails and require detention of many more people at the expense of taxpayers. And finally, this bill would also further burden an already backlogged court system. The last point that I'd like to make, to return to my opening remarks, is that there is no evidence to support any claim that mandating cash bail has any impact on whether a person will reoffend while they are released pre-trial. There are also no studies to suggest that cash bail makes it more likely that a person will appear at later proceedings. Given the consequences of mandating cash bail and the lack of any real impact on public safety, we would ask you not to expand the list of bail-restricted offenses at all, but certainly not to include all felony offenses in Georgia.
All right. Do you know whether or not any other states have similar provisions? Are you familiar with what other states do on this?
So we took a look at the laws in other states in the Southeast, focusing on this region, and our research did not find any state that mandates cash bail for all felony offenses. Most have similar schemes to what Georgia has currently, which is naming a select few offenses that we consider capital offenses or serious violent offenses, but not to include an entire class like all felonies. So this, based on our research, we would be a real outlier in the region.
Okay. Any questions for Ms. Barnes? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
And last person signed up to speak is Ms. Maisie Lynn Guertin, Georgia Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. Welcome back.
Thank you, Chairman. I will not reiterate, my colleague, Ms. Barnes, has covered a lot of what our position is in this bill as well. I just wanted to give you a couple of other details about bail in Georgia. One is that judges have the right to deny bond altogether. They don't have to set a bond. The only time a bond has to be set is if a person hasn't been indicted within 90 days of a felony arrest. And so there's a lot of discretion that they hold. When a bond decision is appealed in our state, the standard is that unless there is a manifest and flagrant abuse of discretion, the bail order is going to stand. The judges get great deference. And I think that's because the judges that are hearing these facts, they're hearing from the state, they're hearing from the defense, they know the community, they're hearing firsthand the information that they need to make a well-reasoned decision about the factors that Ms. Barnes described to you that are the bond factors in our law, and they know the norms of their community. They are in the best position to make this decision. With all due respect, this bill would put this body in their seat in making bond decisions on felonies. And they are constitutional officers who are better situated to make these decisions at the trial level. It's also worth noting that there is a rebuttable assumption against bond for second or subsequent serious violent felony offenses. So the most serious cases, it's actually our burden, the defense's burden, to give some reason to get a bond. You can trust that the judges are going to make the best decisions here. We don't need to have such a broad brush. I don't know exactly, to answer your question, Chairman, what I've seen when I've looked at some of this bond stuff is that there tends to be a delineation between violence and nonviolence. And felonies, nonviolent felonies and misdemeanors are handled particular ways, and then violent felonies are handled in a different way, which is what I believe our structure has begun to do already with what Senator Robertson has already put in place.
All right. Any questions for Ms. Guertin? We have a question. Senator Tillery.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your comments. Did you say there's a rebuttable presumption against bond on the second or subsequent charge?
Serious violent felony.
Serious violent felony. Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Robertson, you want to close us out? Briefly.
I will say Miss Maisie just thanked me for not naming this the Maisie Act, since she's the one that brought that up. And I do appreciate her coming up. But what I will point out, some things that were said, is that the judge that really brought it home with the bright lines statements right here in Fulton County, where their volume of felonies are extraordinary. And the vast majority of these individuals that went out and committed these violent crimes, which led what we had to do a couple of years ago, these were individuals that were out on OR bonds and other things for felonies, and their second and subsequent arrest was for a violent felony while they were out. So this right here, and we're just looking at a very few charges that I read off that would change this, and I do believe that the state of Texas is still considered the Southeast, and in the state of Texas they do practice this. It helps in their court system for the judges to manage their felony dockets. Thank you. That's all I have.
Any questions? Yes, we do have a question from the committee. Senator Rett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just curious as to whether or not this gets rid of pre-trial diversion for all felonies.
No, sir, it does not. The court still has the opportunity to assess bonds and move individuals into pretrial, and it happens in cities like the city where I policed in. We were able to accomplish both.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? All right, that's everyone that signed to be heard on the bill. What's the pleasure of the committee? We have a motion to pass by Senator Kennedy. Do we have a second? Second by Senator Hatchett. Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. We have 4. All opposed? We have 3. Motion carries.
Thank you, sir. I was hoping for unanimous, but I'll accept the victory. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, last bill on the agenda. Senate Bill 551. Chairman Tillery. Wherever you're comfortable, you're good right there. You got that big budget to take care of. I don't want you to exert yourself too much having to walk down front.
I appreciate you looking after my health.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senate Bill 551 is honestly tags into the last bill we just talked about. As you know, we've had a lot of filings that were made. We've had some issues with judges being able to make accurate decisions concerning dispositions of whether or not to grant bail based on or bond based on disposition of cases. I think you heard Maisie testify just a second ago that there's a rebuttable presumption that exists against bond on a second or subsequent serious violent felony. Well, one of the issues that we've seen is a backlog with the clerk's offices of whether or not those dispositions can be have been filed, so the judges are not aware if there has been a second or subsequent serious violent felony. So Senate Bill 551 is probably more of an arrow at an issue, whereas the Lieutenant Governor's bill earlier today, Senate Bill 441, was much more of a comprehensive adjustment, looking at trying to address this backlog. I do think that Senate Bill 441 has a chance of being successful. If it wasn't, though, Senate Bill 551 is here, and the way it works instead is there's $5 of a filing fee that goes to the clerk's cooperative authority. And 551 is extremely simple. It says, hey, listen, if that office, which is mandated with getting these dispositions resolved, is more than 60 days behind in getting those dispositions resolved or getting them filed where the judges can have accurate review of them, that $5 would eschew from the clerk's cooperative authority and instead be put into the state general fund.
All right, any questions for Chairman Tillery? All right, there's one person signed up to speak on the bill, Mr. Mike Holloman with Superior Court Clerks.
Also, I have a handout if you care.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am Mike Holloman. I am here representing Superior Court Clerks, and I concur with Senator Tillery that Senate Bill 441, which I testified on about a week ago in this committee, has a very good chance of making a meaningful improvement to the way that criminal case data moves from arrest to disposition. However, what Senate Bill 551 overlooks is that process of successfully transmitting dispositions into the GCIC network is dependent on a number of things happening as that case moves through the system, starting with the arrest and the fingerprints, which create what's called an OBTS, the OBITS form. The OBITS form has several key pieces of information without which the GCIC system will not accept the dispositions. Clerks are transmitting dispositions to GCIC regularly and promptly. The problem is that they are being rejected because of incomplete information that the clerks don't have, don't control, and have no power. Now, Senate Bill 441 puts in a mechanism that we hope will bring all of the players together, law enforcement, DAs, clerks, judges, and some of the state actors, and find standards that we can agree on for moving this data through. As to the authority, their involvement in this is strictly as a pipeline. When criminal case data was mandated to be transmitted electronically, that was, by the way, in Governor Barnes' tenure, so that'll tell you how long ago that happened. At that time, the real estate network that the authority had developed was the only pipeline to every court in the state, all 159 counties. It just didn't exist in the mid-90s. There was no other way. So their role, and we weren't really all that happy because now it has come back to bite us with being involved in the transmission of criminal data through the authority's network. But, you know, we accepted it and took that on. Again, I want to emphasize the only role that a real estate authority, which is governed by a board comprised of judges, the governor, lieutenant governor, speaker, and superior court clerks, a county commissioner, govern the actions of that board. That board is purely about UCC filings and real estate filings, and they have a wonderful network that's been continually improved, of course, over the last 15, 20 years that it's been in existence. I won't walk through the handout, but I would urge all of you to look at that. It looks detailed, and it is fairly, but I'll say this is only the tip of the iceberg of what we will need to discover and bring out and discuss as Senate Bill 441 if it becomes law, and if this new criminal case disposition board is comprised and given the resources to move forward. I think we can flesh this out, identify the things that are working, identify where it's not working, and there's a provision in 441 to give a report to this committee, the House committee, the governor, and other involved parties to point out where it's not working. But I appreciate that dispositions are important. We have been working on the problem since the day the CCH system, which is the charge-based system that GCIC migrated to close to 15 years ago. The day it turned on, this problem started because it requires reconciliation of an arrest charge to a disposition charge. And the clerks are not in a position to do that. That has to happen along the way with other players. So I would urge you to, hold off on this bill. It's not constructive in my opinion.
All right, any questions for Mr. Holloman? All right, Senator Tillery.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Holloman, for being here. Senate Bill 441, do you feel it gives the clerks the power to remedy this issue?
I think it implicitly places the clerks not in a position of having any more votes than anybody else. As you know, the panel, the board is comprised of 12, 14 different people. We do have 2 votes like many other people. The sheriffs have 2, DAs have 2. But I think what it does by sort of putting us up at the front end is it implicitly saying, clerks, y'all are kind of in a position and have expressed a willingness to do this over the years. This goes back to JDX, which is in 2005. We had funding for that, and then the recession hit and yanked all the funding away, because what you want to do is to automate the transmission of the data, particularly from Tracker, which is the PAC software. We need to create an applet, a connection between GCIC and the PAC Tracker system so that the DAs aren't burdened with manually entering that data. But I digress. I do think that it, at least theoretically, says, clerks, we want you to manage this process. We can't, we're very collaborative people. I mean, it's
Sometimes
just,
I would beg to differ, but
well,
please continue.
Everybody, but I believe that they really are, and we've in UETA, when you passed the Uniform Electronic Transactions Act in UERA, there was a process that had to set up rules, and the bar wanted to create a new thing, and we ended up doing it, and I think everybody was happy with the end product. So I don't know if that answers your question. I won't ramble on. I do think it has a very real chance of producing marked improvement but it's a difficult. I mean, there's a whole lot of people that got to agree to do their jobs.
Can I go inquire further, Mr. Chairman?
Sure, why not?
Thank you. Mr. Holloman, you told me that 441 is a good bill. Do you think 441 is going to give you the tools you need to resolve the issue of the backfiling of the criminal backlog of dispositions? Because if it's not, then we need to do something more.
Funding is still an issue. I've not seen or heard of funding for Senate Bill 441.
If only we knew the person that was chair of the budget and the appropriations committee.
I mean,
no,
yeah.
well, I almost find that insulting.
Well,
No, I almost do. Because we have continuously been in a position to help and tried to help. And what I wanted to offer you was to pull back my bill. And if you thought 441 was going to go forward, I was going to offer to pull back my
I
bill.
do think it's going to go forward.
Do you think it's going to resolve your issue?
Yes, it has the opportunity to resolve the issue.
If it does not, I'm going to ask you to support my bill next year.
All right.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to withdraw Senate Bill 551 for consideration by the committee.
All right, yeah, I'll withdraw it as chair from consideration this evening. That is the last bill we had on the agenda, and so with that, we are adjourned.
Thank you, Mr.